Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Jones, the Chief Operations Officer and Executive Vice President for the National Association of Certified Valuators and Analysts and the Consultants Training Institute. We are hosting NACVA's 2019 annual conference here in Salt Lake City, our home city, and our keynote presenter for this conference was Kindra Hall. She gave a great presentation on the power of storytelling. We understand that most of our members in the profession working in this industry struggle a little bit with professional services marketing, branding, telling your story to your clients, even the courts. And Kindra shared some great ideas and strategies on how you can just tap into some of the things you already have in your arsenal, your stories, to help make your practice more successful, gaining clients more successful. And Kindra, I said this to you earlier, but I'm going to repeat this. You were one of the best keynotes we have ever had. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh,
it was
thank
so
you.
good.
It was so fun.
Yeah, I could tell.
It was. I mean, you wouldn't think that, and
right.
It was just, it was so fun. They were so great. Great people. What a great group you have here.
What was it about when we called you and got you engaged for our conference? What was some of the things that interested you about our group in crafting your message that you brought to your presentation?
You know, I think, so it's easy for me when it's all like salespeople, right? Or people who come in and their primary job is marketing, like they're a marketing and sales executive, or, you know, the people who know that their job is to tell stories. Like that's, you know, so I speak for a lot of those audiences. What I loved about this group, and when we were talking and as I was thinking about it, is some of my favorite groups are the people who, that wouldn't be the first thing they think of themselves as. Like, ooh, I think about the numbers and I'm more analytical and I'm, you know, much more technical. Storytelling, that's not my area. And one of my great joys is to be able to help bring that out in someone and say, no, you know what? These are stories that you have. These are moments that you've lived, and you're missing out if you aren't bringing them to life. And so, you know, to have that opportunity to sit down with this group. Now, I didn't know. It was an early session too, and they were just laughing away at 8 a.m. in the morning. It was great. Yeah.
You started your presentation with something that is obviously everyone has a memory of, and that's their high school experience.
Right.
And you told what I thought was amazing, how you wrote that physics paper, and the instructor, your teacher for that class, gave you one of the nuggets that helped you define your career and find your path. Talk a bit about that high school story and your high school teacher that sort of got you on your path, that you connected so well with the power of storytelling.
Yeah, well, and I think we have moments on any of our professional journeys where we're like, oh yeah, that was a moment that stood out as when I realized that this was something that I wanted to do or that I could do. And in that particular instance, it was a paper about science. It was about science, and so you would think that you have to write all about science, but the truth was I wrote everything that I could, and I still had one page to go. And in that moment, I did what I thought was cheating and played to one of my strengths, which was to tell a story. But when I got the grade back, it turned out that putting a story surrounding the technical information was actually the best strategy I could have used, because in that particular instance, you know, when you're in a science class in high school, your objective is to show that you understand the concept, that I as a student understood this particular physics concept. And by wrapping it in a story, it showed that yes, I understood the technical information, but also the real life implications. And that was his comment.
Yeah,
was his comment about that.
An excellent application of information to real life stories.
That's right.
That was so perfect.
Well, and especially for any audience, you know, we have that. It's very common to think, whether we're putting together marketing material or a proposal or whatever it is that we're doing, to just give the information and to think that that's enough, because people aren't giving us assignments and saying, coming back and being like, you came up you missed it. You just gave me the information. But to know now that that is actually what's happening. We have those moments where we hand in our work and it just doesn't sit well. We don't get hired, we don't get the response. And in those moments, you're probably missing the story.
Mm-hmm. You brought out a good topic about why storytelling works so well. Talk a bit about that.
Well, we often think of storytelling as a soft skill, as something that we could do or something that we could leave out, take it or leave it. And if you're not storytelling inclined, you're more likely to leave it out. But there's a lot of science behind the effects of storytelling and how our brain responds to stories and how our decision-making process how it actually starts with the stories that we're told, and then we can backfill it with the logic that is given afterwards. And then of course there's a lot of just that human element. I mean, entire cultures are built on the stories that are told. Before there was the written word, and certainly before there was any of the technology that we have now, this is how we learned, this is how we made sense of the world around us, and that simply doesn't just go away because we now have computers and cell phones. It's still part of our being. So being able to tap into the natural human programming to want to hear stories is worth the investment, is worth at least the exploration.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you got into the science behind storytelling, and how it triggers or can lead to trust.
Yes.
And that's critical. The science aspect of it was really fascinating to me, because I think most people would perceive storytelling as just an external kind of a connection, but there's there's obviously science behind it. Talk about that. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's just the way that scientists have explored the way that our brain responds to a story and the chemicals that are released that connect us with people and that hone in our attention to the story that is at hand. And I'm sure you can tell, and I'm sure anyone who, I had it happen the other day where I called a friend of mine. I had a story to tell her, and I just got her voicemail. So I just left in the voicemail like, oh, I've got a story for you. And then she called me back, and then she texted me, and then she emailed me, and then she sent me a message on Instagram. I was like, I can't wait to hear this story, right? But that's the thing, is we crave the story. We want the story. And so, if you want to give, if you're trying to create messages that people want, then you should be giving them what they want, and that's the story.
Humans love stories. It's science. Stories build bridges. Those are some of the key. And stories are memorable, and that's what really makes that connection. You shared those concepts with our members and the attendees today as to how they can incorporate that into their marketing strategies and their client strategies. Talk a bit about those things a little bit.
Yeah, I think that we have habits now of talking very high level about what we offer, or spending a lot of time and sometimes in many cases money figuring out what our mission statement is and what it is that we stand for, fancy videos that have text coming in and out and people talking on that very high level. But the reality is everybody's saying the same thing. For the most part. I mean, you'd probably be better off to say, there's those commercials that are out right now where the woman is like, the guys are moving her furniture and she's like, oh, that's my grandfather's piano or something. And he says, don't worry, we are the okayest movers you can find. And at least so it kind of stands out, right? Because at least they're not saying what everybody else is saying. And so what was that?
We're the best.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We care about our customers. We're going to go above and beyond. We'll do it until it's right, or whatever the jargon is in any particular industry. And you think that putting those words together is going to make you different.
Magic, right.
And it just makes you sound like more of the same. Where the best strategy to take is to take those words and find a moment where they were in in action. You know, I actually had one of the members come up to me afterwards at the table and share with me a story that he said that I could share. I don't know if he knew that I'd be sharing it right here, but he said when it was his very first client, he was a CPA, and it was a retail customer, and he went to plug in his, and I don't really know, I don't know that, but he went to plug in his machine underneath the console of and when he got on the ground underneath where their systems were to plug it in, there was a $20 bill on the ground. And he was like, that's weird. So he picked it up and gave it to the guy that he was working for. Didn't really say much about it. He's like, oh, there's a $20 bill down there. Came back, did it again, and again, as he went under the table, there was another $20 bill there. Picked it up, handed it to the guy, and he said to him, he's like, there may be an issue here if they keep having $20 bills on the ground underneath your console. And the gentleman, the boss at the retail establishment said, no, I put those there to see if you are a trustworthy guy. And you passed.
Wow.
So that right there, even as I was telling you that story, which he just told to me, weren't you picturing being under the console, or and even I don't know the details of it because he didn't tell them to me, and I am not familiar with what it looks like under there. But you can see that. So that little story right there can be turned, he could tell that story to the camera and it be like a really visual, very realistic, very memorable way of communicating that you can trust him, because it was his very first job, $20 on the ground, and he did what was right.
Wow. You also touched on a very key element of what our members deal with, and that is conveying very technical information.
Yes.
Very technical accounting, valuation, or litigation. They're telling their clients sometimes what they don't want to hear.
Yeah.
Or they're telling stories to a jury or to a judge. And you talked about finding the stories in the data.
Yeah.
Talk about a bit how those kind of storytelling strategies can help with complicated, complex concepts.
Well, I mean, a lot, particularly for this work, right? You're not only doing the work, but you also have to be the translator. Like, how do you make this very complicated stuff make sense to whoever it is that because my guess is the reason they hired you is because they don't know all the ins and outs of this, right? And so my suggestion is to once you put your message together, whether it's for litigation or whatever it is, once you have your message and you feel like it's complete and all the information is there, take a moment to rise one level above it. And what is the higher level message there that if you were to get everybody on the same page, this is really what we're getting at here. Now I'm going to share all this information and this data and this technical and the who's it's and what's it's and everything. But ultimately, after I share all that with you, you're going to understand this up here. So bring it to that higher level. Like, what is the message that you really want them to know? The action that they aren't going to want to take, but you know that they need to. And then what's a story that illustrates that? So interestingly, I say interestingly because we just had a conversation off camera about skiing. But I was working with a gentleman who was in data analytics for a very large company. And he had to go in and present to people that are not in data analytics, and it was always a struggle. And he was very cerebral. So not like, not some shiny presenter, but he had to be able to communicate very pertinent, very important information to the higher ups to inform their decisions. And he took that job very seriously. And he said, so what do I do? Like, how do I? And he told me one of the examples where the data was showing them this, but if they looked at it this way, or it was a very complicated problem. And I said, do you ski? Because I didn't understand what he was saying. And I said, do you ski? And he said, yeah, I ski. And I said, have you ever, when you ski, like, don't you, you don't just always go straight down the mountain. Like, in order to get down the mountain, you have to move from side to side, right? And he's like, oh. And I said, so have you ever had a moment in your ski career enjoyment where you felt the consequences of aiming your skis straight to the bottom of the mountain and you tumbled and fell because you just got going too fast and couldn't handle it? He's like, yeah, I had that happen. I'm like, or have you ever had it where, where you sloped from side to side and were able to navigate the mountain better? And he said, yes. And I said, okay, so it sounds like this is ultimately the high, that's the message he was trying to deliver. Like, guys, this data is showing us that we can't just go straight at it. We've kind of we've got to go here, and then we've got to go here, and I know that doesn't make any sense to you because you want to get to the bottom of this problem right away. So that's what he was trying to communicate based on the data. So that was the data. He told me that, and I said, okay, so when is a time in your life that was? And so then it just so happened that he skied on the first try. Otherwise, it had to. And so then, all he had to do was find a story of a particular ski run of a particular time, whether he was a kid, and tell that story and say, folks, that's really what we're looking at here.
Right. And now let me tell you how we need to weave our way through this problem rather than just shooting down.
Exactly.
And crashing.
And people will, and no matter who it is that's in the room, no matter if they're the CFO, the CEO, the CSO, the CBDB, LMNOPO, they will understand that because everybody can understand that. You don't even ski.
Right.
And you understand that. Exactly.
Yeah. And so similarly, that's a quick tip from Kindra is when you're dealing with complex analytical information, think about something you enjoy doing and relay that similarly to your clients. I love it, love it, love it. Don't stress. Don't forget the story. And the 3 key components to storytelling.
Yeah.
Talk about those.
Finding stories, and I do. This is something that I feel very strongly about. It's the reason I do what I do. It's the reason I write what I write is because I don't want to just say storytelling is important. I want you to be able to access it. I want you to be able to say, okay, I see that this is important now. How do I do it? And so the process for storytelling, particularly strategically, particularly in business, is 3 parts: finding stories, crafting stories, and then telling them. And each one comes with its own challenges. To find stories, the thing that I find really stops people is they think they don't have a story. And that's because we often think of stories as the things that we see in movies, the things that we read in epic novels, or even the big stories that are in our newspapers or our news feeds. But the reality is, even very small stories that just happen, like a moment with a skiing incident, would have done that gentleman a lot of good to communicate what needed to be done based on the data that he had found. It wasn't a life-changing story, it was a simple story of a ski trip, right? So that's the first step is to find your stories, and the first step to finding them is to believe that you have them, because you do, and then to really be thinking about different moments in your life. I suggest looking for the nouns in your life. If you have to deliver a story, like if you're talking to a new client, well, think about previous clients who maybe were in a similar industry or facing a similar problem, or were looking for a similar service, and then tell the story around that. So the first step is finding stories. The second part is crafting them. And again, I like to keep it very simple. In the keynote today, we talked about using the arc normal, explosion, new normal, instead of beginning, middle, end, to really start with what the person was struggling with or what was happening to set the scene. What we didn't talk about on stage, so this is a little insider information, but this is based on the research that we've been doing on the science of storytelling, is that ultimately there are 4 key components that will make a difference in your storytelling. Just 4 things that you want to make sure that you include that will make your story, based on our research, more compelling, more influential, more attention grabbing, more entertaining, because people like people that are entertaining. And that is that the stories need to have identifiable characters. You can't just be talking about, XYZ company. You are working with a person in that company, and you're talking to a person likely when you're telling this story. So it needs to have identifiable characters, it needs to have emotion, not just the information or first this happened, then this happened, then this happened. What was at stake there? We need a specific moment. So say, I'll never forget the day 3 years ago, Salt Lake City, I was sitting in the ballroom, and XYZ speaker got on stage. So that people have the opportunity to start in that co-creative process and imagining the story themselves. And then the final thing is specific details. So I brought up I told the story of the physics class in the keynote. And do you remember I mentioned the heavy bars coming over my shoulders?
Coming down on the roller coaster.
Yeah, the heavy bars.
Yes.
And I used that very specific detail about that, how bars come over your shoulders when you're on a roller coaster, to drive the visualization of my listeners a little bit farther, to give them little details that their brain will want to attach onto. And paint the picture more thoroughly in their minds. And in doing so, we'll draw them in further. And in doing that, it'll keep their attention. It'll have them be more connected, and then also more influenced by the story itself.
Referrals, you also referred to in your conversation about how referrals are really, really important, particularly within our membership, within our industry. They refer business between themselves if they get involved in an engagement where they might need help. They're also looking for their clients to refer their colleagues or other business owners to our members for services. And so referrals are super important, but I liked how you engaged in the conversation about how branding is important and how referrals are used to reinforce brand. Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, that branding isn't about how well you can tell your network who you are and what you do. It's how well your network can tell their network who you are and what you do. And as we were just talking about storytelling and that co-creative process, and that it will stay with people longer, you want to make sure that you're top of mind when a referral opportunity comes up. And the way that you do that is burrowing into colleagues' minds so that they remember your story, and it's right there and available to refer you forward. Same with your clients. Be telling them stories about you and why you do what you do. Those stories will live in them. So when they encounter somebody who needs a service that you do, your story will be frontward versus anyone else.
Also, congratulations on publishing your first book.
Thank you.
Yes, it's got to be a big accomplishment.
Yes.
Coming out in September.
That's right.
And so for those of you who are interested in learning a bit more about the topics that Kindra discussed in the keynote, give a little bit about your book and how the members viewing this can get a hold of it.
Yeah.
I like the whole text feature.
I know. That's to get the
fancy.
slide. I know. That helps get so they can get the slides, and then they have the emails, so then that way we can keep in touch. Because, it's always, you hear a speaker once, and then you may never see him again. And so it's a great way for me to stay in touch with great audiences like yours. But my new book is coming out. It'll be released officially September 24th. It's called Stories That Stick. It's a business book. Okay. The subtitle is How Storytelling Can Captivate Customers, Influence Audiences, and Transform Business. And essentially it takes what we talked about here, takes what I shared on the stage, and just builds it out. There's more research, there's more case studies and stories, and there's a lot of strategies too that I want people to be able to read it and be like, I can apply this. So to find it, it's available right now for pre-orders, yay, at all of your favorite online locations. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, so pre-order it now, and then it'll ship to you in September. But yeah, I'm thrilled the response already. There are a few advanced copies out in the world as we're building momentum for the book, and it's a terrifying thing to write a book, because you just write it. It's in your head, and then it's in a computer, and then you send it to like your publisher and your mom, and that's it. And then you start trying to send it out into the world, and there's a long gap between those 2 points. And so now that it's out there a little bit and the feedback's coming back, now I'm really excited. So yeah, I would love to have the pre-order support on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and here we go.
Well, you all should take advantage of that and get a copy of it. We'll provide that detail just in the YouTube little box here that describes this session. We'll put all the information on how to get a copy of Kindra's forthcoming book. Yeah. So thanks again. You were very great, very fascinating. I myself learned a lot and appreciate that. And good luck in your endeavors.
I hope to see
And
you again.
Thanks for sharing all those good tips.
Thank you. Thank you.
We appreciate it. Kendra.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.